Hello and welcome to another episode of All Fired Up with Brandon Ramsey. We are here live on both YouTube and Twitter at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time on Wednesday, February 26th, coming to you as I do each Wednesday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time here live on the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show YouTube channel and on Twitter at BRamseyKSR. Please make sure you are following and subscribed to those two avenues. One of the best places to keep up to date with everything going on across the college basketball universe. Obviously, today is Kentucky game day. That's why I'm a little extra UK'd out here in terms of dress. But we will get into the Kentucky game at Oklahoma a little bit later because is some exciting news for Big Blue Nation heading into this evening's game. But first, we want to recap some of what happened on Tuesday night, which will include talking about just the continued minefield that is the Southeastern Conference. Of course, we saw Georgia defeat Florida last night in certainly one of the more shocking outcomes of SEC play to this point in the season. I also want to, along with talking about Alabama and some of the other results from SEC play last night, I want to talk about Duke a little bit because they just continue to just beat the living crap out of folks, to put it mildly. And then we're going to get into tonight's slate a little bit and talk about some of the games that we will all be watching on Wednesday evening. So again, if you are here watching us live, please make sure you give the video a like on YouTube. Please hop into the comments as well, and we'll interact here live throughout the show today. And then also make sure you are subscribed to the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show YouTube channel, and you're following me on Twitter at BRamseyKSR. So as I said, we're going to start with the Georgia-Florida game. I was at a high school game last night up here in Indiana, and I didn't get to watch a lot of this game. I did watch the end of it on my phone just because it got so interesting, but I was obviously following the score as I could, and I believe Georgia was up by 26 points. Yes, it was 39-13 at one point in the first half. 7:53 to go in the first half. 39-13 Georgia. I know I think it was 45-25 at one point as well. Georgia led by 16 points at the half. And it was funny. I was sitting there at the high school game, and I was just thinking, like, I didn't even look. I guess there would have been times where I would have been kicking myself. Maybe I guess ultimately I'm happy, but I almost looked at the live money line for Florida because I just had this sneaking suspicion that this game was not over. Well, with just over a minute to go, Florida had reversed it all, came from 26 points down, and actually took a 2-point lead, and I believe it had a free throw to make it a 3-point game, 80 to 78, excuse me. Then down the stretch, Georgia comes down, runs a beautiful set play for Blue Kane, who kind of comes off of a screen, fills in behind on the wing, knocks in a three. Georgia does a good job of making some free throws down the stretch and escape with an 88-83 victory. Normally, you would not use the word escape for a team that once led by 26 points, but it was almost one of the most epic collapses, not just that we've seen this year, but probably in years and decades, in terms of a team coming back from 26 points down to win, especially at the high major level like this. But I think that it just goes to show how insanely difficult it is to win in the Southeastern Conference this season. And I think there's a few different ways that you can look at it. First off, essentially every road game that you play in the Southeastern Conference, aside from, I guess, going to LSU and South Carolina, every road game that you play is going to be a quad one game. Kentucky went on the road earlier this season and lost at Georgia, and there was a lot of folks that clowned the Wildcats for that. And just by nature of Big Blue Nation, it was Big Blue Nation who made the biggest deal out of losing at Georgia. And, you know, they become prisoners of the name on the front of the jersey. Georgia's no good. How in the world did you lose at Georgia? Georgia's a bad loss, et cetera, failing to recognize, or more so even just like not being willing to acknowledge the fact that this was a quad one loss for Kentucky. And then guess what happens? Florida goes in there as a top 5 team in college basketball. And yeah, it ended up being close, but got absolutely boat raced for the overwhelming majority of this game. Silas Demary had 21 points for the Dogs. Austin Newell had 15 points and 9 rebounds, 14 off the bench for Tyron Lawrence. In the game, Blue Kane, who I mentioned hitting the big shot, he had 12. And then RJ Godfrey rounded out those in double figures with 10 points. Will Richard had 30 in this one for the Gators. So, like I said, it really just showcases the depth and how talented every single one of these teams are in the Southeastern Conference. It really is a minefield night to night of trying to navigate and win these games. And I think that the other lens that you now have to sort of take a step back and look through is what Auburn is doing. Tigers are 13-1. They play Ole Miss later this evening. We probably just still haven't made a big enough deal about what Auburn is doing this season, playing in one of the best conferences that we've seen in decades in college basketball, playing one of the most difficult schedules, not just in conference, but out of conference as well. Auburn has played one of the most difficult schedules from start to finish this season that we've seen in recent times. And they are 25-2 overall and 13-1 in the league, with their only losses coming at Duke, who is pretty clearly the second best team in the country, and we'll touch on a little bit later, and then a 9-point loss to the Florida Gators. So we really need to continue to give Coach Bruce Pearl and this Auburn team more and more flowers, because nights like last night where Florida goes on the road and loses at Georgia remind you of how tough it is on a nightly basis, and what Auburn has done so perfectly. And Georgia's the perfect example. Georgia had a really, really good shot to beat Auburn in Athens. I'm going to pull that game up right now. I forget what it was late, but like this game was coming down to the wire, and Auburn gets out of there with a 2-point win. Similarly, it was not too long before that, they went on the road South Carolina and won by 3. They went on the road to Texas and won by 5. They beat Tennessee by 2 points at home. They have found ways to win close game after close game, and I think that there's a couple reasons for that. One, coaching. Coach Bruce Pearl is one of the best in the country. And then you have just an absolute star, and to me, who continues to solidify himself as the National Player of the Year in Janai Broome, who you can play through and who can make all the decisions necessary as a scorer, as a playmaker, as a rebounder, as a defender to win those close games. And most teams just don't have that. I saw a graphic earlier today, and I wish I could give the person credit, but I can't remember who it came from. But that in the final, it was something like in the final 4 or 5 minutes of Auburn games over the course of the last, call it, month. Maybe smaller sample size than that, because I think it was like 5 games. Over the last 5 games, in the last 4 to 5 minutes of those games, Janai Broome, I believe, has taken 48% of Auburn's shots, so essentially half of their shots. And that's the way that it's kind of supposed to be. When you have arguably the best player in college basketball, you want to play through that person. And Auburn has done as good of a job of that as anybody in the country this season. Then they finish off with certainly once again, a murderer's row within SEC play. Like I mentioned, they're at home hosting Ole Miss this evening. Then they go at Kentucky on Saturday, a game that I will be in attendance for. Then they're at Texas A&M on Tuesday the 4th, and then they wrap up at home against Alabama on March 8th. So it's not going to be a cakewalk for them to finish this thing off 17-1. I said before the season that I thought 14-4 would win the league, and 13-5 might get you a share of it. Obviously, I did not see Auburn being this dominant. I think I'm going to be pretty much right for everyone else that's going to have at least 4, probably 5 losses in the SEC this season. Auburn just ended up being more of an outlier than I ever could have imagined. But just an incredible season that they are having, and it kind of got driven home last night with Georgia's win over Florida. The other big result in the Southeastern Conference last night was Alabama just totally boat racing start to finish. Mississippi State has finished up 111-73. Alabama made 22 3-point shots. They were 22 of 45 from three. Chris Youngblood, 7 of 11 from deep. Mark Sears, 5 of 12 from deep. Jaron Stevenson off the bench, a perfect 3 for 3. Aiden Holloway, 3 for 7. LeBaron Philon made a couple as well. And that's the scary thing with this Alabama team. We've talked about it a number of times, whether it be on the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show or here on All Fired Up, this program. I've said from the beginning of the season, I did not think that Alabama would shoot the ball the way they shot it last season. That has so far been correct. They were 37.3% from three last season, even with last night's blow-up performance. They're still 35% from three this year. But they've combated that by being the best in the country around the rim and from two-point range. They shoot 60.7% from two. They put so much pressure on the rim via the dribble because of guys like Mark Sears, LeBaron Philon, who's been excellent as a freshman, Aiden Holloway, who's been excellent as a transfer. And those guys have really been able to allow Alabama to win tough games against really good teams, even when they don't shoot it at an elite level. But obviously, because of the volume that they shoot, because of the pace at which they play, and because of the way they put pressure on the rim and the playmaking that then can send out to their catch and shoot threats, Alabama plays games where it is impossible to beat them. And they do that in a way that honestly almost nobody else in college basketball can quite touch. They do have a ceiling, the 22 for 45 ceiling, that other teams can't touch. Like there was nobody in college basketball. You could have taken Auburn's A-plus game, Duke's A-plus game, Houston's A-plus game, Florida's A-plus game, Tennessee's A-plus game. You could have put this game on the road. It would not have mattered if Alabama made 22 threes, which most games they shoot enough to possibly make 22. There's nothing you can do. And that's what always makes me uncomfortable. It's why I almost never bet on Alabama, though I actually did last night. So credit to me there. But it's why I almost never bet on Alabama, because of that variance, because they could have just as easily gone 9 for 45 last night. And that we're talking about a whole different ball game. But they finish up the season 3 games remaining. I mean, it's insane how tough these schedules are. Alabama's final 3 games in SEC play are against top 5 KenPom teams. They're at Tennessee on Saturday, and then they host Alabama, and then they're at Auburn. Like, they could play well and go certainly 1-2, and possibly even 0-3. That's what I was talking about, thinking that still all these teams I think are going to get to 5 losses in the SEC. There's certainly a couple losses there for Alabama to come. Florida still is at Alabama, hosting A&M and Ole Miss. They have 4 losses. As long as they lose 1, they're going to get there. And then everybody else is at 5 losses. So it really turned out about like I expected in the preseason. I just didn't see Auburn running away with it in the manner that they have this season. And once again, just more and more credit needs to be thrown onto Coach Bruce Pearl's shoulders. Switching gears now a little bit away from the SEC and going to the other end of the spectrum, which is the ACC, to talk about the Duke Blue Devils. Now, I've gone on the record on the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show probably 2 months ago, talking about how I'm a little bit tired of hearing about how bad the ACC is, because you can look at the metrics, like it's still better than the Mountain West, and it's a heck of a lot better than all of the other conferences. So, like, let's not get it twisted. This isn't a mid-major conference. These teams aren't bad. They're just not. They're nowhere close to the other high major leagues, but it's still a heck of a lot harder to go on the road and beat SMU than it is to go on the road and beat Bradley, for example. And like that's no disrespect to Bradley. I love them. I love their coach having a great year. Love the Missouri Valley, but like it just is. So let's not be blinded by our Duke hatred and just say that, well, of course they're running the table through the ACC, because it ain't that easy. I can promise you that. And then also, obviously, if yes, they went on the road and lost at Clemson, so they're 16-1 in the ACC. But their games since then have just been utter domination. I'm just going to read them off. 80 to 50 or 78 to 57 over Cal. 106 to 70 over Stanford. 80 to 62 at Virginia. 110 to 67 at Madison Square Garden against Illinois on Saturday night, a game that a lot of us watched. Illinois is a very, very talented team. Just got blown off the floor. Again, that's a Big Ten opponent. And then last night at Miami, 97 to 60. Obviously, Tyrese Proctor goes down in that game and did not return. That will be something to monitor. However, not that this is a good thing. We certainly wish well to Tyrese Proctor, but Isaiah Evans stepped up in a massive way in his absence, scoring 16 points, 5 of 8 from 3. One of the better games that the freshman has played this season. And I think that certainly if Tyrese Proctor misses any time, but whether he does or does not, that confidence leading into the month of March for Isaiah Evans will be massive. Caleb Foster made a couple shots off the bench as well for the Blue Devils in that one. And then, oh, by the way, you get 16 points, 5 rebounds, 6 assists, no turnovers for Cooper Flagg. And I continue to differentiate it like this. And I've already said it. There's a chance that this is me just kind of trying to outsmart myself. But there's no denying who the best basketball player in the game of college basketball is. It's Cooper Flagg. I have to go with Janai Broome as player of the year just because of the resume. And I just got done saying, I'm not hating on the ACC. I think that what Duke is doing, especially with the way that they're just steamrolling everyone in their way, they deserve just immense amounts of credit for that. But watching Janai Broome put up the stats night in and night out that he is doing against a historically tough schedule, in my opinion, that sets him apart and makes him this season's National Player of the Year. But as I mentioned, Duke's dominance deserves to be talked about on a nightly basis. It just doesn't. I will mention that this maybe got cleared up a little bit with Florida's loss. Tennessee still poking around as well. But I said it yesterday before the Florida game that I thought Houston had played their way into a number 1 seed because of what they're doing in the Big 12, another very, very good league with recent wins over Iowa State, at Texas Tech, on Monday night. You look back to their 4 losses are like by a combined 14 points across 3 overtime periods. Houston deserves a number 1 seed at this point. So to me, you're looking at Auburn, Duke, Houston, and then you're going to kind of battle it out there between Florida, between Alabama, between Tennessee for that final spot throughout the rest of the SEC schedule. That's at least how I am looking at it right now. Now, to turn our focus to tonight, to what's going to be on the docket for Wednesday evening. I think the biggest game on the slate is Michigan State at Maryland. There's major Big Ten conference implications for this one. If Maryland wants to have any shot of somehow matriculating their way to the top of the Big Ten standings, they obviously have to win tonight in College Park against Michigan State. But if Michigan State can go on the road and win, it would go a long way towards Sparty winning the leagues. The Michigan State and Michigan are right now both 13-3 in the league. Michigan is in action on Thursday night against Rutgers, so certainly the easier game of the week there, but massive one between Maryland and Michigan State tonight. Maryland's been playing at such a high level of late, but Michigan State is coming off of 3 consecutive wins since they dropped that one at home in East Lansing to Indiana. Since then, they've won at Illinois. They came back home and beat Purdue, then went on the road and won at Michigan. After playing Maryland tonight, they still have to play Wisconsin in East Lansing. Then they go to Iowa and wrap up with another game against Michigan. So there's still a lot of moving parts in this Big Ten conference race, again with Michigan State and Michigan out in front at 13-3, but Wisconsin at 12-5 having a puncher's chance, with Maryland at 11-5 having a puncher's chance as well. So that will be a game to watch this evening. And then you have Kentucky at Oklahoma. As I mentioned, there's some good big news surrounding this game for Big Blue Nation, and that is the probable, and I use that word for a reason because that's what they were listed as on the injury report last night, the probable return of both Lamont Butler and Jackson Robinson. Obviously, Kirk Creason remains out. Seems like a foregone conclusion. We're not seeing him again this season in a Kentucky uniform. But Lamont Butler and Jackson Robinson, two of your starters, two of the three top scorers on Kentucky's team, are probable to make their return tonight in Norman against the Oklahoma Sooners. Now, why is this such a big deal? A myriad of reasons. One, obviously, it's just never fun to play without your second and third leading scorers and your backup point guard, especially when all three of those guys are your primary ball handlers, primary playmakers. Also, it's a big deal because tonight's game at Oklahoma is another quad one opportunity for Kentucky. It's one that even at or near full strength, it's not easy to go on the road and beat potential NCAA tournament teams like Oklahoma. It's not easy to go on the road and win as a very small favorite. It's not easy to go on the road and win in your conference in a quad one game. It's a much harder to do that if you're not even close to full strength. So Kentucky needs this win to stay above 500 in quad one. A win would certainly keep them on that 3 seed line going into the final 3 games of the regular season. A win would also give them 9 quad one wins, which would tie them for the second most with, dang it. I should have had that ready. I thought I had it off the top of my head, but we have Oregon and who else? Oregon and Tennessee. I was about to say it. I should have trusted myself. Tennessee and Oregon also have 9 quad one wins. Obviously, Auburn out in front with 14. I misspoke. Alabama has 10 quad one wins in second. You would tie yourself for third with Tennessee and Oregon at 9 quad one victories if Kentucky can get one tonight. And then also a few weeks, it hadn't even been a few weeks probably, but maybe a week or so ago, Evan Miyakawa put out a graphic, and he has so much great lineup data and analytics. It's easily consumable, but it's also very, very in depth. So if you haven't checked out at evanmia.com, it's a great resource for fans that want to get into analytics. But he put out some lineup data that Kentucky's normal starting lineup being Lamont Butler, Jackson Robinson, Otega Oweh, Andrew Carr, Amari Williams. I think that was the 6th most efficient or sixth best lineup in all of college basketball. And obviously for the last 4 to 5 games, Kentucky's been playing without that lineup. So, and I know that there was another graphic recently that talked about Lamont Butler being one of the most impactful players in all of college basketball. And there were some people behind him like Cam Jones at Marquette, like Ryan Nimhard at Gonzaga. I know a couple other big names like that. It's like, imagine those teams not playing without those guys and how big of a deal we would be making about it. And it's like you kind of just expect Kentucky to keep humming along because they've shown that they can. But that's the impressive part. That's what we should be lauding them for night in and night out, that like they've missed Lamont Butler for 8 games this season. They've missed Jackson Robinson for 4 games this season. They've missed Kirk Creason for 18 games this season. And we're talking about a team that's ranked in the top 20 in the AP poll, a team that is 14th as of this morning in the net, a team that has 8 quad one wins, and a team that is essentially a consensus number 3 at worst number 4 seed in the NCAA tournament, while missing those guys for that many games. So if Kentucky can get those guys back and keep them healthy down the stretch here, it's going to be really fun to see what this team can accomplish. Now, the schedule, just like every other team in the SEC, it's not going to do them any favorites. It's not going to be easy just because they might be back to full strength. You're at Oklahoma this evening. Then you have to host number 1 Auburn on Saturday. Then you got to turn around and then you host LSU on Tuesday. That's certainly a must-win from a resume standpoint. And then you wrap up regular season play at Missouri on March 8th. So it's not going to be easy down the stretch no matter who plays in the games, but you are in a position now where I think that if you go 2-2 down the stretch which means winning the games that you're supposed to win, which now with these guys back, you probably need to go in and win at Oklahoma, then obviously take care of business against LSU. If you can finish 9-9 in the SEC, I think that you're certainly no worse than a 4 seed. You might even still be a 3, especially if you win a game or two in the SEC tournament. If you somehow go 3-1 down the stretch, which would give you 2 more quad 1 victories, now you're looking at a situation where you're probably pretty solidified on that 3 line. And if you're able to do that and be healthy for these final 4 games of the regular season, hopefully a couple few at least down in Nashville, the SEC tournament, I think that you would see a team in Kentucky that's going to garner a lot of momentum heading into March Madness. So it's a great time of year to be getting back to full strength if you are Coach Pope and the Wildcats. We'll quickly touch on some of the other games here to sort of list them off. You have Utah State at Boise State, a big one in the Mountain West. Speaking of injuries, Arkansas has been kind of dismantled by injuries throughout this season, but kind of similar to Kentucky. Despite that, Coach Calipari and the Razorbacks are playing some of their best basketball of the season. They have a game where they're hosting Texas tonight. I know Adu Thiero is going to be out, but that's one for a team that's on the bubble, which is where Arkansas is. You have to win that game at home tonight, regardless of the status of your roster. St. John's is at Butler. I believe St. John's has an opportunity to lock up at least a share of the Big East title with a win in Indianapolis tonight. Texas A&M hosts Vanderbilt. That's a game that I was involved in a little bit of back and forth this morning on which side is Kentucky, or which side are Kentucky fans on this evening. I personally see it as preferring to give Vanderbilt another loss. Now, if you look at it from maybe a more positive Kentucky standpoint, if Texas A&M loses, you do at least have a path to the number 6 seed in the SEC tournament. But I think that's something that you probably just need to worry about more down the road. That's probably it in terms of the best games to. Well, number 1, Auburn, they're hosting Ole Miss. We talked about that one a little bit earlier. Indiana, another team that's played their way onto the bubble. They host Penn State. So you have Arkansas and Indiana, 2 teams that have played their way onto the bubble recently, are hosting teams that they're probably better than at home. It'll be interesting to see if they can keep themselves on the right side of the bubble with wins this evening. Travis asks in the comments, what's today's best bet? I haven't really given it much thought yet, but just quickly scrolling through one that I did like this morning. You know, people that know me know I'm not the biggest Buzz Williams fan. I'm not the biggest Texas A&M fan, and obviously they haven't played great of late. But I do like Texas A&M minus 7.5 tonight against Vanderbilt. I think you're kind of starting to see this Vanderbilt team come back down to earth a little bit of late. They've lost 6 of their last 9. They've lost 5 of the last 7 games, including 3 of their last 4. Obviously, I just mentioned the Aggies have lost a couple straight as well, but I just think that going back to College Station, they are better than this Vanderbilt team. I think they'll be able to lock them up some defensively, and they'll be able to rebound against them like they do against pretty much everybody. And they'll find a way to pull away and probably win this one by double figures. So I like Texas A&M minus 7.5. But there we have it for today's episode of All Fired Up with Brandon Ramsey. Thank you to the over 200 of you that have tuned in here live for today's show. If you are watching live, again, do 2 things for me. 3 things, actually. Leave this video a like on YouTube, subscribe to the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show YouTube channel, and make sure you are following me on Twitter at BRamseyKSR. Also, tell your friends to join us next Wednesday. It's always a lot of fun to have some interaction throughout these shows. And otherwise, I hope you all have a great rest of your evening, and go Cats tonight. We'll talk to you later.